All right, let's just dive right into this. You've got these two massive continents, Europe and Africa, right? And sitting right there between Spain and Morocco, they are separated by this incredibly tiny, almost unbelievable little sliver of water. We know it as the Strait of Gibraltar. It's literally one of the most famous borders on the entire planet, but here's the thing, it also represents an absolutely glaring, unsolved mystery of modern engineering.
I mean, just look at that number, 14 kilometers. That is the entire distance at its absolutely narrowest point. To put that into some perspective for you, if you could just pave a road and drive a car straight across it with no traffic, it would take you, maybe a half hour? You can stand at a scenic viewpoint in Spain and literally see the mountains of Morocco clear as day. And yet, contrasting against a whole century of grand visions and brilliant minds, literally every single attempt to physically connect Spain and Morocco has completely failed.
And the sheer scale of what's at stake here is just massive. We aren't just talking about, making a convenient road trip for tourists. This tiny geographical choke point handles an unbelievable volume of global traffic. We're talking 100,000 ships and 18,000 oil tankers every single year. Let that sink in. A staggering 80% of the European Union's merchandise trade relies exclusively on this specific route. A third of the world's oil and gas flows right through here. The strategic and economic advantage of finally building a physical bridge or a tunnel, it would fundamentally change the whole global economy.
So, that brings us to the core question of our explainer today. If it's so close, and if it's so incredibly lucrative, why on earth hasn't it been built? I mean, it's not like we just forgot how to build big things, right? China is out there routinely building mega bridges spanning vast oceans in under a decade. And, actually, decades ago, the UK and France successfully conquered the 50-kilometer English Channel, which is a gap way larger than this one, with a massive underwater tunnel. So why does this mere 14-kilometer stretch continue to ruthlessly defeat us?
Well, let's look at Project Atlantropa, the 1920s plan to drain the sea. Going all the way back to the 1920s, there was this German architect named Hermann Sergel, and he had a vision that is honestly kind of hard to even wrap your head around today. He didn't just want to build a simple bridge. No, he proposed a plan to literally drain the Mediterranean Sea.
Let's break down Sergel's wild, incredibly audacious plan step by step. Step 1. Construct 7 giant hydroelectric dams across the entire region. Step 2. Use those dams to lower the water level of the entire Mediterranean Sea by a whopping 660 feet. And then, Step 3. Reclaim all that newly exposed landmass to physically merge Europe and Africa together into a brand new supercontinent. He even named it Atlantropa. The crazy part is, it was so meticulously planned that Sergel even included these massive lock chambers, kind of like the ones they use in the Panama Canal, connected to the Suez Canal, just so global shipping vessels could still pass through those drastically altered water levels. But as you can probably guess, this incredibly hubristic idea totally died with Sergel in 1952. The reasons were, immense. Just conducting the preliminary testing for a project like this would have cost billions of dollars. And more terrifyingly, draining the sea would have guaranteed absolutely unpredictable, catastrophic ecological ruin across multiple nations. Plus, let's be real, the sheer lack of modern construction technology back in the 1920s made this way more science fiction than actual reality.
Which leads us to the ocean's defenses and a violent clash of waters. Jumping forward to the late 1970s, Spain and Morocco actually finally partnered up to properly survey the water, only to find out they were about to be physically repelled by the ocean itself.
The absolutely crucial point here is understanding how the water actually behaves. The Strait of Gibraltar is subject to this phenomenon called upwelling. This is basically where the warm, light water of the Mediterranean Sea violently slams into the cold, dense, melting ice waters coming from the Atlantic Ocean. When these two very different water densities collide, the warm water shoots rapidly up to the surface, and the cold water aggressively sinks down. This creates these unbelievably powerful, chaotic convection currents.
So picture this. You have 11 km/h surface currents crashing into winds that can reach 108 km/h. It creates an underwater environment that, for all intents and purposes, resembles countless aquatic tornadoes. Back in the 1990s, when Spain and Morocco sent the Nautilus and Pollard survey ships out to drill into the seabed for samples, these violent conditions literally shattered their drill rods. The turbulence was so extreme it was practically impossible for the vessels to even drop a stable anchor.
Talk about an engineering nightmare. Let's look at the 5 fatal flaws of the shortest route.
Because when surveyors finally did manage to get some solid data, they revealed a horrifying truth hidden beneath the waves. The absolute shortest 14-kilometer path, which logically is known as the Canyon Route, is basically a geological minefield. It contains 5 fatal flaws that essentially destroy any traditional construction plan. Flaw number 1 is just the extreme depth of the thing. Think about when the UK and France built their tunnel. The maximum depth of the English Channel was a relatively manageable 180 meters, but the Gibraltar Canyon, it plunges down to a staggering 900 meters. If you were to try and build a bridge pillar right there, it would literally need to be 3 times the height of the Eiffel Tower, stacked end to end just to barely poke out of the surface of the water. Unbelievable.
Now let's quickly unpack the rest of these insurmountable problems. So aside from that crazy 900-meter depth, the seabed down there isn't even solid. It's completely filled with these deep craters made of breccia clay, which is this weak, highly porous mix of mud and rock fragments. If you try to anchor a heavy bridge pillar in that, the soil just collapses. And right below that clay, impenetrable, incredibly hard rock layers that will straight up destroy drilling machines. Then, as if that wasn't enough, this entire route sits directly over an active tectonic fault line between the African and Eurasian plates. That is the exact same friction zone that caused the catastrophic Lisbon earthquake. Finally, because this is a primary, super busy global shipping lane, any bridge would need a massive 70-meter above-sea traffic clearance. So think about it. Building a massive, super rigid structure on weak clay directly over an active earthquake zone, almost a full kilometer underwater, it is just structurally impossible.
Now, as you know, humans are incredibly creative, and I just have to briefly highlight this fascinating little detour. Seeing all these traditional engineering failures, this American architect named Eugene Sue proposed a wild, futuristic $20 billion alternative. His big idea? Just bypass the ocean floor entirely. He designed this massive, flexible sea snake structure, basically a floating tunnel that would dip safely below those turbulent waves and eventually connect to a sprawling 3-mile-wide artificial floating city right smack in the middle of the strait. It was a beautifully visionary idea for sure, but financially and practically speaking, yeah, it was just a step too far.
So that brings us to the 28-kilometer compromise, where a longer distance gives you better odds. Because in 2005, a major engineering breakthrough finally happened. Surveyors made this totally counterintuitive discovery. Avoiding that 14-kilometer shortcut was actually the secret to surviving the strait.
See, while the canyon route is a short 14 kilometers, we know it's 900 meters deep and full of terribly unstable clay. But they surveyed a new path, the threshold route, and while it doubles the distance to 28 kilometers, it's only 300 meters deep, and crucially, it sits on much more solid rock. So by compromising and just accepting a longer distance, a massive 3-tunnel railway system suddenly became practically viable. We're talking 2 tracks for high-speed rail and 1 for service. Something like that could potentially cut travel time between major cities like Casablanca and Madrid literally in half.
But then we hit the geopolitical roadblock. And this just proves why diplomacy is so often harder than engineering. By 2006, the engineering was finally figured out, governments were taking bids, and get this, a Swiss engineering firm actually won the contract to start the work. But enter the final twist of this whole explainer. It turns out that human politics can derail things way, way faster than nature ever could. Decades of really complex territorial disputes have just repeatedly frozen this progress in its tracks. Going all the way back to 1979, a joint cooperation agreement was actually signed. Fast forward to 2008, right as the tunnel project was getting greenlit, the Spanish king visited Ceuta and Melilla. Now, these are territories physically located right on the Moroccan coast, but they are controlled by Spain. Morocco strongly claims these territories, so in diplomatic retaliation to the royal visit, they pulled their ambassador and boom, the tunnel project was instantly put on pause. Then jump to 2020. Just as relations were starting to thaw out again, Spain allowed a Western Sahara rebel leader into their country for medical treatment. Morocco viewed this as Spain directly supporting a rebellion against them and, once again, all talks just abruptly halted.
But right now, the pressure to build this thing is absolutely boiling over. The United States, the United Kingdom, China, India, and the entire European Union are all actively mounting pressure on both Spain and Morocco to just figure this out and finalize the project. The world's major economies are just too intertwined today, and as we saw earlier, they rely way too heavily on this one single narrow strait. They desperately need this crucial backup physical route built, just to protect the global economy from any catastrophic supply chain blocks.
Which brings us to a really powerful reflection to end on today. The saying goes, before building a bridge of steel, we must build a bridge of trust.
The engineering blueprints for that 28-kilometer tunnel, they're ready to go. The massive financial capital, it can easily be raised. But until those deep historical, geopolitical fault lines between the nations are finally stabilized, this physical gap is going to remain unconquered. It leaves us with a pretty fascinating question to take away from all this. Is the final unconquered gap between Europe and Africa actually in our oceans, or is it entirely in our minds?